I never really understood how much of a hindrance ADHD was having on my life. When I was a kid, there was a lot of medications that were around. Like Ritalin started to become very popular in the 90s. And in the early 2000s in grade 8, I went on a medication that wasn't Ritalin. It was similar to Ritalin. I don't know the exact name. If I asked my mom, she probably would remember this. But I remember my grades before this were like C's, like 60s, late 60s, early 70%, like 71, 72% on average for the majority of my courses. Apart from visual arts and also gym, I was relatively athletic and I was a really good drawer as well. So I had good grades in those. And I also liked those. And that's also a factor with ADHD that some people might not realize. Sometimes it feels like a superpower. If you like something, if you're interested in something, you actually perform above average on it. But if you're not interested in something, it really will affect your grades and affect your overall performance. Now back to the Ritalin discussion. So I was on this drug that it actually improved a lot of my grades. It was actually shocking. I went from being like a C student to like a B plus, A minus student just because it helped me focus and I was able to focus on things that I didn't necessarily enjoy. Like it helped me focus on French class, math, science, and I got relatively decent grades. Nothing like crazy, not A pluses or anything like that, but considering I never had that much interest in those courses and those subjects, I did relatively well. But then what ended up happening was kind of interesting. The drug that I was on was giving kids heart attacks. And my mom found out that and took me off of it. I also noticed that when I was on it in class, sometimes I would get these crazy nosebleeds. Like I would be writing down on a sheet of paper, doing a test or something like that, and then I would just see like a red dot, and I'm like, duh, 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 and it would just keep going faster and faster, and then it was almost like a fountain. And that went on pretty much the entire time I was on that drug. So there is definitely bad side effects. So something to think about if you are a parent looking to get your kid on some sort of medication. There's going to be side effects, and luckily none of the really bad side effects hit me. But it was interesting that my grades did get better. And as you get older and you have ADHD, you don't really think about it in the same way because you're out in the workplace now, you're not going to school, you're not necessarily tasked to do things that you dislike. You know, usually you go to college for stuff that you want to pursue, right? So you at least have more of a choice versus I feel like having ADHD as a kid is the worst. Now, as you get older and you maybe undiagnosed or you're starting to realize that even at an older age, ADHD is going to affect you. And I've noticed this as well when it comes to just my attention to day-to-day tasks. It's crazy. You know, it's almost like I have dementia and I'm not even 40 years old. And I'll forget little small things just because it went in one ear and out the other because it never really ended up getting retained in my brain because I just wasn't either interested in the subject or for whatever reason, it just kind of felt like non-important information at the time. And that's become a real problem now. However, I've noticed that the more I engage in the things I like, the better I am at it. And again, it's like the superpower thing earlier. Same thing as school. You know, when it came to visual arts and gym, I did relatively good. And then outside of that, not great. And now I'm starting to realize the effects of ADHD when it comes to even just being a father. Like there is certain things that I didn't realize would affect me as much. So like ADHD, I'm a pretty light sleeper. So when Logan wakes up a lot at night, it'll affect my sleep immensely, right? And just little things like fussiness sounds, screaming will send me into like a fight or flight response more than someone who's a little bit more, measured, doesn't have little small things get to them quite the same way. And I think ADHD is also, that is a part of it. You're way more irritable because you have trouble focusing a lot of the time on just like little mundane tasks day to day. You know, you want to focus on the big picture rather than fine point details unless it's something you're really interested in. And this has been a real problem in my entire life. And I've noticed that I used to self-medicate because of this, whether it was drinking a few beers or having a few glasses of wine. I noticed weird things where I would be able to focus a little bit more on small, tedious tasks if I had like 2 beers in me or something like that. And obviously that's a dangerous path. If you realize that and you try to use that to your advantage, it can have disastrous consequences. You can't be drunk all the time. You can't be drinking all the time because, what if you need to access a vehicle? What if you have important things to do that day? Next thing you know, you've ruined that day and potentially the next day if you're hungover. And it's very dangerous and bad for your health. And we've talked about this before. Like I've talked in length about the dangers of alcohol abuse, but I've noticed that people who have ADHD, they find ways to self-medicate, and that might be one of the ways. I know adults who go on medication similar to Ritalin, even at an older age. Now, I'm not saying don't do that. It's just something that I don't think I want to do because I've had a bad experience with it when I was a kid. But I've noticed that navigating life, especially with modern technology and having ADHD, is even worse because if you're ADHD, you're easily distracted. And in the modern world with modern technology, you can be distracted by almost anything. And that is a real problem. Even just having a phone, sometimes I just turn off my phone for like half a day. Yeah, it gives me a bit of anxiety, but there's a little bit of relief there, like where I don't have that as an easy kind of distraction, especially if I'm hanging out with my child. It's so easy to pick your phone up, when you really should be giving your attention to your kid. And sometimes it's just the way to kind of move away from that when you should be putting more attention on something that's important. And that is one of the weird things with ADHD is it's like your brain has trouble sometimes deciphering what is important in the moment. So it wants to kind of wander instead of focusing on something that could be, even like if you're driving, there's some people who get distracted if they're driving if you're ADHD. Luckily for me, I have enough of a fear of car accidents and driving that I'm really focused when I am driving, hyper-focused, you would say, because of ADHD. But there's some people who are the opposite, right? Like they're just distracted because they have ADHD. They're focused on everything else instead of the task at hand. And it's a real problem, and it's just something that I wanted to talk about. And I've just been dealing with it a lot, pretty much my entire life. And there's some people who don't even believe in ADHD. And, sometimes I think that might be true, but then also when I do the research on ADHD, I'm like, no, this sounds exactly like me. It's like pretty spot on, actually. There's even weird things with sounds, and I don't know if this is directly attached to ADHD, but I think the name is like misophonia. Could be something else, but sounds will trigger me sometimes. Like if I'm in a movie theater, for example, and again, this might not be necessarily attached to ADHD, but it could be a byproduct of it. But if I'm in a movie theater and the volume of the movie isn't particularly loud for whatever reason, and if there's just like someone directly beside me eating popcorn really loud, and popcorn in general is like a pretty loud food, it's something that always kind of baffled me is like, why would this be something synonymous with viewing a movie when you want to be paying attention to the movie and you introduce a food that is, annoying to listen to at the very least. But yeah, sometimes my brain would just hyper focus on that, the noise beside me, instead of the film, because it's like an annoying thing that I just can't escape, it feels like. And I've gotten better, at least in kind of focusing on something else and not letting it bug me as much. But I used to have brutal issues with that, especially when I was a teenager, early 20s as well. It would just drive me insane. Like the sounds of like loud chewing would just drive me nuts. It's similar to the way people feel about nails on a chalkboard, which is ironic because I've never really had that much of an issue with that sound, but loud chewing and stuff for me has always been a huge trigger. But regardless, this is my experience of living as an adult at 38 years old, living my entire life with ADHD. So if you've lived as well with ADHD, if you know anyone with ADHD, leave your thoughts about this down below in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.